Welcome to Divorce TV. I'm your host, Wally Marcus. Our topic today is same-sex marriage and divorce, and my guest is my old friend and good friend and colleague, Dina Afek. Dina, welcome here. I'm glad to have you here. We're going to get going a little bit more, but I want to tell some people other things first. If you have any questions, please feel free to email us. If you would like to be a guest, you'd like more information about the show, ideas, things like that, you'll see our email on the screen periodically so you can get to us. And also, I always like to advise people that this is not legal advice. This is an informational show to give you some background. If you have a question, and this is not a substitute for legal advice, please make sure you consult a divorce professional. Once again, our topic is same-sex marriage and divorce. Mm-hmm. And Dina, welcome. I haven't seen you in a while, but it's always good seeing you and talking about divorce.
Nice to be here.
Not our divorces, but
right.
Divorce. Well, people always, I've talked to guests on that one, and they always say to me, if you haven't been divorced, do you understand the process? But I think I got it after 30 years. But anyway, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Enough about me.
Sure. I'm a family law attorney. I've been practicing about 8 years in the field. I have a private practice, solo practice, here in Tucson.
What's your background besides that?
Before I got into law, I was a counselor, therapist for about 20 years. I'm married for about 28 years. Have 3 children.
The counseling background, I think, is really something I think is essential. I co-mediate with my wife, Mary, and she's a clinical psychologist. But so many lawyers don't have that background, and I think that's critical, especially in the field that we work in. We talk about same-sex marriage and divorce. Sometimes I'm not sure how to refer to this. We were talking a little bit beforehand about gay, lesbian, or even the whole issue, and the term I've come across recently that I've sort of liked a lot was the marriage equality, which is a term which I think is gaining thing, and the whole white ribbon movement of tying that one. Right. But you have any thoughts on?
Yeah, I think one of the main arguments for gay marriage or same-sex marriage, which is another term, is that it is equal rights for all people. So that heterosexuals and homosexual people should have the same rights to marry. Marriage provides a lot of benefits, legal benefits, other benefits, social standing, emotional benefits, all kinds of things.
We're going to get into those. We'll make sure we get into those later on and come back to all those things on that one. Although in some ways I think, having lived through a lot of the civil rights movement in the 60s, this has, to me, in some ways, has a similar feeling to it as that did, and the way people sort of look at it now and remember the way they looked at it then. So I suspect, maybe in 20 or 30 years we'll look back on this period the same way that people look back now on the civil rights movement. That
could be. I can't really talk about the civil rights movement because I grew up in a different country. So yeah.
There's the civil union and there's marriage.
That's correct.
What's
the difference? There's actually another category as well, and that's domestic partnership. But legal marriage offers federal benefits to couples and protections to couples. Civil unions gives rights and protections. However, they are specifically bestowed by the state. So there are no federal benefits to civil unions, and only people can only really receive those rights in the state that they live in.
Okay.
And then there's
that's if you're married. We're talking about first category marriage.
That's right.
Second category
civil unions.
And what about the rights that people have in civil unions?
The rights that they have, they are limited to the state. They can be similar rights, but there are no federal protections.
That's sort of interesting. I think that gets lost in the political argument. I mean, people sort of say, well, even President Obama, who's sort of seems to be moving on the issue, they sort of equate civil unions and marriage, but really they aren't.
They aren't the same. They are not the same. I think there's some overlap, of course, but they aren't the same. And then there are domestic partnership rights that give rights to people, to couples living together, whether same sex or opposite sex.
I was just wondering, sort of thinking out loud, whether people would think the issue would be different. Do you think that? I'm not sure it would be. I think even if civil unions and marriages had identical benefits, I don't think that would still resolve the controversy, would it?
Probably not.
I mean, because I think there is a sense of...
That's right. I think there is
symbolic marriage.
That's correct. I think there's a real sense that marriage is something special, and the people that argue against same-sex marriage, I think that there are religious arguments. There are arguments about the slippery slope happening.
I'm not sure, I guess maybe, I don't know if you have any thoughts. I'm not sure what people are. I've never understood exactly what they're afraid of.
I don't understand it either, and I'm going to be very honest. My bias is for same-sex marriage and giving equal rights to all peoples, minorities and majorities.
I just, as I said, it doesn't seem to be. I think there's a fear somehow that it's going to somehow affect them. And I guess for me, the largest part of family, and I always think, one of the things that I've in my life that's been important is being a father.
Right.
I mean, in the family and those issues, in that you would think in some ways that a married same-sex couple that was raising children, in a solid family would be something people would want.
That's right. But some people argue that children that grow up in same-sex households somehow are disadvantaged or suffer or have all kinds of problems. That has not panned out at all.
There's maybe an unsaid argument that people think that somehow if a child is raised in a same-sex marriage, they're going to become gay or
I'm sure that's part of it, and there's homophobic tendencies of people. They're afraid of the other, of the person who is different, of the unknown.
That's why I come back to the different parts of the country and the whole civil rights movement in the 60s, because I think those are the same kind of emotions. You could almost substitute, one for the other at that point. But we seem to be doing it. And as I said, this is going to be broadcast later on, but this is where the Ninth Circuit decision came down on the California case this week. So
right. That's right.
I've never seen them ever overrule an initiative before, so it's going to be interesting. I'm not sure you totally said what the partners, you said the third category was. The
domestic partnership that gives rights to unmarried couples, and that includes same-sex couples. So it's a broad category, and it's usually it's always limited to a state or municipality, or
so that would deal with somebody who's a heterosexual couple as well.
That's correct. But same-sex couple could also choose to get that.
I'm not even sure I know enough about that one. On the domestic partners, how do they define what's a domestic?
And to be honest, I don't really know what the definition is. My guess is that it depends on
how do you
where
become
it gets.
I mean, I don't think there's a ceremony that I've seen or something that says we're going to become the domestic partners.
You would have to register. So let's say
your city.
Okay. That's right. Okay. Your city accepts domestic partnership, so you would register.
Do we do that in Arizona? No, we don't. Do we?
No, we don't do anything. I think there were some
I think it's sort of
cities
overshadowed by. But I mean, once again, I think that's an interesting thing because it really does deal with a lot of things we're talking about.
Right.
Affect same, heterosexual couples as well.
That's correct.
And I think next we can sort of go into a little bit onto some of the legal issues of how that affects it. But you would think that would be a
right. I think the city of Tucson had some domestic partnership rights, and I don't know exactly what the status is of that right now, but.
Let's talk a little bit about what the legal consequences of some of these things are.
Sure.
Social Security?
I mean, there are, I think there's a government organization put out that there are over 1,100 rights that...
How many?
Over 1,100 rights that have something to do or are dependent on the marital status. of a person.
That's hard to believe. Can you list them all for us?
I can absolutely not list them all for you, but they range from taxes, from estate planning, government benefits, employment benefits, like getting the health insurance from your spouse, covering that, medical benefits, going to the hospital when your spouse is ill.
That's one that always sort of bothers me, is the fact that somebody could be ill and not be, can't be seen, can't make decisions, or something like that.
That's
it seems almost cruel. But
or somebody dies, your partner dies, and you're not allowed to make decisions about burial and.
Do you think that there's
rights.
an economic argument here? I mean, it seems to me the things you're talking about all cost somebody something. I mean, if they're on insurance, or the other things, they're.
Right. I think there is an economic argument against same-sex marriage, but it really, from what I've read, it really does not pan out, and it's not a large issue. I mean, it wouldn't break Social Security. It
doesn't have to be a lot of money. We were trying, when I was in Connecticut, we were trying to get health insurance, as ironically Massachusetts does. I'm not sure Romney was responsible for this, but if you got divorced, you lose your health insurance benefits. Massachusetts is one of the few states where I think maybe the only state where that doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. We were trying to get that in Connecticut, and one of the major companies in Connecticut said essentially we save $150,000 a year because of not continuing it, which seemed to me a pittance.
Right.
And so sometimes it doesn't have, and they kept fighting this thing, which would only cost them $150,000, but would have saved a lot of people. And this may be one of those kind of issues too, where it's really not a huge number.
Right. I don't believe it's a large number.
So Social Security.
Right.
What happens in Social Security if you're not married?
Right. Well,
no benefits.
Yet you don't have any benefits.
And that's
from your spouse.
Once again on the Social Security. 10 years married. You have to be married for 10 years.
Right. That's right.
To do that, to be entitled to the benefits.
And that can be really huge for individuals.
And I guess the disability and other aspects of it, especially if you have a non-working.
That's right.
They haven't built up enough 40 quarters themselves to do that on that one. Inheritance?
Inheritance as well is a big issue. You can't inherit from your spouse if you're in a same-sex relationship.
Unless there's a will.
Right, unless there is a will. Right.
So the intestacy laws would say.
Yeah. Forget it.
Do you have any sense, and I haven't looked this up myself, but what's happening in the states where there is, if there is a marriage, but once again, you get into the federal-state kind of situation.
Right.
And if the state like Connecticut, Massachusetts, the states that allow it, and their state laws, I assume, affect it, but that just still doesn't. I'm not sure that affects Social Security, does it? I mean,
no.
And DOMA,
no, actually,
domestic.
That's right. The Defense of Marriage Act really kind of put the kibosh on that.
So even if they allowed marriage, we'd still have to change some of the federal. I mean, marriage is not sufficient, really.
Well, not with DOMA in place.
Yeah, because
I think usually
that defines marriage as between
a man and a woman. That's right. So, and if that wouldn't exist, then our Constitution has the full faith and credit clause, which would give full faith and credit to another state.
Have you seen? I don't think I've seen much people. I mean, most of these battles now seem to be state, but nobody seems to be. Have you? I didn't think about it until just now. Right. Is I don't see anybody trying to repeal DOMA.
Well, Obama just said that he's not gonna fight for it.
They're not going to enforce. Was it enforced? No, I guess that was the military.
Right. Yeah, they're going to still. They're not going to not enforce it, but they're not going to fight it. So if there's a challenge to it,
in the courts, yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's maybe.
So what are some of the other issues that you think that come up here that affect by not being married?
Well, I think the other big issue is like there is. We talk about same-sex marriage, but there's also divorce. The whole issue of divorce, because I think if you're have a legitimate
the real
marriage,
issue between if you can't get married, you can't get divorced.
That's right. You can't get divorced. And furthermore, there are issues between the states. So even in the states that allow same-sex marriage, if you then move to another state that doesn't recognize the marriage, then you have a very difficult time getting divorced.
Let's run this through. You get married in Connecticut,
right?
Move to Texas.
Yep.
Can't.
You can't get a divorce. There are only, I think, 2 states that recognize marriages, same-sex marriages from different states. That's, I believe, New Mexico and what's the other state? And one other state.
But they really, and the people could get into a real bind because if they're residents of Texas,
that's right.
They couldn't necessarily. Oh, I guess they might be able to. I guess I'm trying to think of the causes of the breakup. There are some jurisdictional issues, but sometimes you have some jurisdictional questions where if you're domiciled in one state, you can't, even though you're married in the other one, you can't go back. So some of these people could be caught not being able to
get divorced, or not getting any of the protections that divorce laws afford.
Have you sensed when you're doing your research on this, found what happens in those situations at all, or?
Well, I think this whole issue is sort of a moving train, which things happening every day and every week. So we don't really know a whole lot. I think there are some cases that have been brought of people trying to get custody or parenting time with children, and for the most part, those were denied when they were same-sex partners.
You raise the children thing, and what happens? I mean, this is an interesting phenomenon. I mean, normally what I've seen happen, and I've seen this in a variety of ways with same-sex, with women. Sometimes I've seen the 2 children, one from each mother.
Right.
But clearly, at that point, and I've also seen situations where the mother, so she, has the child, she's the mother, the other person's not on the birth certificate, do they have any parental rights at all? What do they do?
No. Well, sometimes what they do, if they're thinking ahead of time, that they may try to have some sort of an agreement ahead of time.
Would adoption work in this case or not?
Well, adoption also depends on what state you're in. If a joint adoption is even allowed for same-sex couples. In Arizona, for example, we don't have that.
So if a couple was same-sex marriage, or just a couple,
right?
Not even.
But they could do a.
I mean, they weren't married,
agreement.
But they wanted the others.
That's right. They wanted the other to have some rights. If, in case they would break up, they would do like an agreement prior to them getting married, or prior to committing, or prior to having the child, or whatever.
You're saying in Arizona at this point that if somebody, they couldn't get married in Arizona, clearly,
right,
or domestic or anything
That's
else.
Right.
But they have a couple living together, they have a child together, let's say the woman has 2 women in the relationship.
Right.
So one's the mother, the other spouse,
right,
or other partner,
yep,
would have no rights.
It has no rights. She could probably file something under the in loco parentis statute.
And you don't think the courts would not allow them to they would not allow adoption in those circumstances? They would.
No.
What's the rationale there? Do you know?
I
don't
know. I think
not
that's
a fit. I mean, is it we're getting down to that? That's not a fit family.
Because that's correct. Yeah, and I think religious.
But that, I don't know. Do you know if that's statutory, or is that just the way the judges rule? In terms of that, does the law actually say,
the adoption is not allowed?
Not allowed if it's the same sex?
That's right.
It specifically says that.
Yeah, that's what I believe, yeah. So.
Interesting. What about, we go back to we talked about taxes. What happens if file a joint return?
Yeah, you can't file a joint return with a same-sex couple.
And that'd be interesting. I don't. Once again, I know this is a lot of new territory for both of us. But I'm trying to think. You think in a state where you had, like Massachusetts or Connecticut, where you were allowed it and you got married, you'd be able to file a state return. You might be able to file a joint state return, but not a joint federal return.
That's my understanding.
Doma's going to
right. That's my understanding.
It's sort of interesting. We talked a little bit about the divorce already on that one, and it seemed to me that when a lot of the California and these cases in the states initially got allowed same-sex marriage, there were couples that had lived together for years.
Yes.
Years. Got married,
yep,
and then very quickly got divorced. I didn't understand. Did you have any sense of what was going on there?
I don't know. The only thing I can come up with thinking about that, and I really don't, quite frankly, know how widespread that even was. But my thought was that a lot of the effort or a lot of the energy in the relationship may have been towards the wanting to get married and to get to that point. And then once that happened, maybe that.
Well, although I don't know if you've seen this, we both in divorce work. I've seen a fair amount of couples who live together, heterosexual couples who've lived together for a long period of time, and then also get married, and then the same issue comes up. And sometimes I think that maybe some of the things. I think yours is a good point on that one, but maybe some of it also may be that somehow people view the relationship differently once they're married. And I've seen relationships where, it's ironically, I fixed this couple up and they ended up getting married, and the woman was in control before they got married and sort of called all the shots. And then once they got married, then he felt that he could assert himself and treated it very traditionally, and all of a sudden he was in control of the relationship. And they ultimately got divorced. I mean, it was just... it changed the ground rules. I mean, it was a strange. You wouldn't think it would, but or I've seen some relationships also where people sometimes behave one way in order to get married, and then when they get married, they behave differently, and so I don't know what the dynamics are, but it was sort of interesting. I just was sort of fascinated by that concept. Once again, in Arizona, I'm sort of bouncing around, I know a little bit, but Arizona does not allow anything. No. And have you seen any? Have you seen any litigation or anything? I don't think anything.
There was some cases out of a different county that had more to do with the whole issue of the child custody and parenting time, and a same-sex couple that broke up. And
it's interesting. Once again, I have some of the Arizona experience, the Connecticut experience. In Connecticut, there was a procedure for couples who weren't married, essentially, to avail themselves of all the procedures of the divorce. I mean, they could do essentially it was...
we have that here too. I mean, this special paternity. But I was saying,
this wasn't through a paternity action. This was, it could have been a couple with no kids.
Okay.
I mean, they could essentially bring a divorce even though they weren't married. And it resolved that. Although we both do mediation. I don't know, have you mediated either I haven't had that situation with a gay couple come in at all.
I haven't had that.
I'm not sure where that fits into the mediation issue. I have come up, strangely enough, and it's just a tangential issue, and I don't know if you've experienced this too, I've done a fair amount of divorces where one of the couples is gay and the other one's not. And the issue that becomes the presenting issue is, that he's come out or she's come out, and then they want a divorce. And of course, for me, the irony of that has always been that that's not the issue.
Right.
That they would have had, whether it was a gay couple or not a gay couple, they would have gotten divorced anyway. That was not the real issue. It really was. I mean, there were other issues on that one. Have you done any looking at divorce rates at all between states or looking at states that have?
There was an interesting study by the Williams Institute, a recent one, I think in just end of last year or something, that showed that there were they found 1% of the total married or registered same-sex couples got divorced within a year. And with heterosexual couples, the percentage is 2% per year. Now, we all know that the percentage of divorces is about 50%, but each year it's about 2% for heterosexual couples. And it was half that for homosexual couples. Now,
I don't know. I'm not sure we have enough history here.
Right. I think it's all kind of on the move, and who knows what the reasons are of that difference.
But I don't know, it's sort of interesting what the comparison would be of the divorce rate in the state of Connecticut between,
Right. Yeah, I don't know. That was an overall thing. They took all the states that had gay marriage and civil union, and looked at the people that identified being in these relationships, and looked at the overall rates of divorce.
Any sense where we're going on all this?
My guess is that we're going towards this being, as you said at the beginning, that at some point we're looking back at this and say, how could we ever not accept same-sex marriage. My belief in terms of the divorces and marriage rates, my guess it's going to come out to be about the same. I don't think there's going to be a huge difference. People are people, and relationships are relationships.
It seems to. I mean, even I felt in the last few years, it sort of seems to be moving gradually in that direction, and not as. And then this election coming up may help define that a little bit more. You talked a little bit about DOMA. Anything else on DOMA which we should know about?
Well, DOMA was enacted in 1996 by Congress, and President Clinton signed it into law. And it really is legislation that allows states to choose to not follow the Constitution in terms of full
Does
faith
the state
and
have an
credit.
option on not following DOMA?
The states, right? But most states
They opt out.
I don't know if they can opt out, but I know that most states have enacted laws that essentially say that same-sex marriage is marriage is a marriage between a man and a woman, and in effect making it impossible, or saying or any other or in many states they change the constitution of the state.
That's sort of strange, though, because there seems to be some regional differences in here. New England seems to be, and I'm not sure what that's all about.
Right.
And we have a lot of transplants here in Arizona, so I'm not sure. We got about a little less than a minute left.
Sure.
A little bit more about kids. I mean, what do you think there's any? I mean, realistically, I mean, you're a mother, I'm a father.
Right.
I mean, any different? I mean, is there effect on the kids if it's a
same-sex relationship?
Marriage?
I don't believe so.
Or sex of a child, two mothers, one son.
No. I did a lot of adoptions for same-sex couples when I lived in Pittsburgh as a social worker, and so I've seen many of those couples and seen them with their children after they adopted them, and I cannot see any difference whatsoever.
In the child.
Also,
well, that's good. I mean, you were exposed to that aspect of it.
Also, studies have really shown that there's nothing.
We are running out of time,
Okay.
Dina. This is
All
always amazed how fast it goes. Thank you for coming. It's a fascinating topic. I think for both of us, sort of exploring and doing that stuff and doing that. But I appreciate you coming and taking the time to be a guest today. And I want to thank you for watching Divorce TV, and my guest Dina Afek for discussing same-sex marriage and divorces. And I hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll watch our next show.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good work.